Picture this. It's a quiet morning in 1955. The sun barely touches the kitchen window, but she's already awake. Hair brushed, lipstick on, apron tied tight around her waist. The smell of coffee fills the air. The children are still asleep. Her husband's shirt hangs pressed and perfect on the chair. This is the life she was told to want. Back then, the dream was simple. A home in the suburbs, a loyal husband, smiling children, and a white picket fence. The American dream, wrapped in a floral print apron. But beneath the polished floors and perfect smiles, another story was unfolding, one that no magazine dared to print. Welcome to 1950s Housewife, the life she never chose. If you're drawn to the untold stories of women in history, to the truth behind the picture-perfect lives of 1950s America, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story isn't just history, it's a mirror reflecting what women were taught to believe and how far we've come since. Let's step back for a moment into that decade of post-war perfection. America was rebuilding. The men returned from war, and the message to women was clear. Go home, settle down, and make life beautiful again. Magazines called it feminine fulfillment. Television called it happiness. But what it really was containment. In the glossy pages of Ladies' Home Journal and Good Housekeeping, women were told that fulfillment came from baking the perfect pie, smiling through exhaustion, and never questioning their role. The ideal woman was obedient, gracious, and always satisfied. She didn't dream of more because she was told not to. Girls were raised on this promise from the start. In classrooms and home economics courses, they learned how to iron, decorate, and serve. They were taught that ambition beyond the home was selfish, that success outside the kitchen made you less of a woman. Society didn't hand them choices, it handed them a script, and every day they played their part perfectly. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form. Each day repeated like the one before, the same chores, the same smiles, the same silence. Behind every curtain drawn and dinner served was a woman wondering what it would feel like to live for herself. She'd pause sometimes, late at night, after the dishes were done and the children were asleep. The house was quiet, the clock ticking softly in the dark. She'd look out the window, her reflection staring back at her, tired, graceful, invisible. And somewhere deep inside she'd whisper the question she could never say aloud, "Is this all there is?" That's where her story begins, in the silence between her duty and her dreams. Stay tuned, because in the next part we'll uncover how the perfect picture started to crack and what happened when she began to listen. The morning sun rises over the same white fences, the same trimmed lawns, and the same streets lined with quiet predictability. Inside, the rhythm of her day begins, not with excitement, but with obligation. She moved through her home like a performer, rehearsing the same act for the 1,000th time. Coffee, breakfast, dishes, laundry. Each task blends into the next until time itself loses meaning. For the 1950s American housewife, life was a cycle that never stopped spinning. Her alarm clock was her purpose, and her purpose was service. She didn't ask why. She just kept moving, like the world expected her to. Every detail mattered. The bed had to be smooth, the floor spotless, the children polite, the husband content. Because if even one thing fell out of place, it reflected on her, on the woman she was supposed to be. She lived under a quiet pressure that few could see, yet it shaped every breath she took. From the moment she woke, she became invisible to herself. Her body worked, her hands moved, but her mind drifted somewhere between exhaustion and daydreams. Sometimes she caught herself staring out the window, watching neighbors who looked just as tired as she felt, all of them wearing the same smile they were taught to wear. There was a strange loneliness inside that perfection. The radio played cheerful jingles about happy homemakers, but those songs often sounded hollow. They spoke of joy, but she felt only repetition. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, a constant reminder that her time was not her own. Each day she performed her role flawlessly. Breakfast by 7, dishes cleared by 8, floors swept by 9. By afternoon she ironed shirts, folded laundry, prepared dinner, and greeted her husband with the same polite smile. He'd ask how her day was, and she'd say fine, even when it wasn't, because a good wife never complained. In a world built for appearances, she was the glue holding everything together. Yet no one noticed the cracks forming inside her. Society praised her patience, but never asked about her dreams. The magazines showed her pictures of women who looked just like her, promising that happiness came from a clean house and a warm meal. But when she looked in the mirror, she couldn't find the same glow. There were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, when she felt the weight of her silence. Maybe it was while folding laundry late at night, or when the children had gone to bed and the only sound left was the hum of the refrigerator. In those moments, she wondered what would happen if she stopped, if she simply didn't do it all tomorrow. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came, because the 1950s housewife didn't have the luxury of stopping. Her value was tied to movement, to service, to sacrifice. And so she carried on, one day after another, smiling through the monotony, convincing herself this was love, that this was what she was meant to do. In truth, she was living a life written by others, a life she was told to want, but never allowed to question. From the outside, her life looked perfect, a picture painted in soft colors, a husband in a gray suit, children with combed hair, and a home that smelled of freshly baked bread. But beneath that calm surface was a quiet truth she could never speak. Her freedom ended where her front door began. She lived inside a cage, built not of walls or bars, but of expectations. It was invisible, yet stronger than steel. Every rule, every custom, every whisper from neighbors reminded her of what a good woman was supposed to be. Society told her to be gentle, agreeable, and endlessly patient. If she showed ambition, she was selfish. If she disagreed, she was ungrateful. If she dreamed of more, she was unfeminine. Her world was decorated with polite words, duty, devotion, respect, but they all carried the same message: stay small. She was allowed to nurture, but never to lead, to speak softly, but never to be heard. And though she smiled through dinner parties and PTA meetings, there were nights when she felt her spirit shrinking a little more with every "yes, dear." The rules weren't written down, yet every woman knew them. The church, the neighbors, even her own mother reinforced them. The idea that a woman's worth was tied to her husband's success and her children's behavior was so deeply ingrained that questioning it felt like betrayal. It wasn't just a lifestyle, it was identity. Inside that identity, she carried an unspoken fear. What if she failed at being perfect? What if she wasn't enough? Divorce was shameful. Working outside the home was frowned upon, and speaking out could turn a community against her. Her life was bound by reputation. One wrong step, one whispered rumor, could destroy everything she had worked for. So she performed her role with precision, every smile rehearsed, every gesture careful. Even her sadness had to be subtle, tears wiped quickly, frustration swallowed before anyone could notice. She was expected to be graceful under pressure, beautiful without vanity, strong but never assertive. And the cruelest part? As the more she gave, the less she was seen. Her efforts blended into routine, her sacrifices invisible. A spotless home wasn't admired, it was expected. A perfectly cooked meal earned no applause, only silence. She existed to make everyone else's life comfortable, yet no one asked if she was comfortable in her own. There were moments when she caught her reflection and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Somewhere along the way, she had lost her name, replaced by titles like wife, mother, and Mrs. She had become a role, not a person. In those quiet moments, her cage didn't need locks. It was guarded by something far stronger: the fear of judgment, the need for approval, the belief that breaking free meant breaking everything she loved. This was the price of perfection. And even though she wore it with a smile, deep down she knew, a cage, no matter how beautiful, is still a cage. It started small, a flicker, a whisper she almost didn't notice. Maybe it was a line she read in a book, or a quiet moment when the house finally fell still. A thought she brushed away at first, but it kept coming back. What if there's more to life than this? For years, she had been the perfect image of what society wanted her to be. But now the glossy picture was beginning to fade. The endless repetition, the cleaning, the cooking, the smiling through fatigue, no longer felt like love. It felt like survival. And beneath that still surface, something inside her began to wake up. She couldn't name it, but it was there, a quiet unrest, a soft rebellion. When she met a friend for coffee, their small talk about recipes and chores sometimes drifted into dangerous territory. Words like lonely or tired would slip out, and both women would pause, afraid to say too much, afraid to admit they felt the same. Books became her secret escape. She'd find herself drawn to stories of adventure, of women who worked, traveled, or questioned the rules. The pages offered what her world did not: permission to imagine. And for a few quiet minutes each night, while the rest of the house slept, she allowed herself to dream. Outside, the world was shifting too. The 1960s were coming, and with them, new voices, women who dared to speak out, who dared to ask why. Magazines began to change their tone. A few brave writers challenged the idea that a woman's happiness was found only through others. Words like identity, freedom, and choice began to echo through living rooms and libraries. She began to notice those words, to feel their weight. They frightened her, but they also gave her hope. She realized she wasn't alone, that there were other women who also felt that same ache, that same longing for more. The silence that had once surrounded her life was beginning to crack. But rebellion didn't always look like shouting or marching. Sometimes it was quieter. A woman enrolling in a class without telling her husband. A wife speaking her opinion at the dinner table. A mother telling her daughter, "You can be anything." For her, it started with a single decision: to listen to that voice inside instead of silencing it. It wasn't an act of defiance, it was survival. Because for the first time, she realized her desires weren't wrong, they were human. Change didn't come overnight. Many days still looked the same: the chores, the smiles, the silence. But the difference was in her heart. Now she carried something new, a spark that couldn't be undone. The perfect picture of the 1950s housewife was cracking, and through those cracks, the light began to pour in. She was no longer content to simply exist. She was ready to feel alive. Time has a way of softening the edges of memory. The bright kitchens, the polished floors, the carefully set dinner tables, they've all faded into black and white photographs now. But the women who lived inside those frames left behind something much more powerful than perfection. They left a story of quiet endurance, of silent strength, and of dreams that refused to die. The 1950s housewife may never have chosen her life, but she carried it with dignity. She followed the rules because she believed she had to. Yet even within those rules, she planted seeds of change without realizing it. Every time she questioned her place, every time she wished for more, every time she whispered why, she was shaping the future. Her daughters watched her closely. They saw the exhaustion behind her smile, the longing behind her laughter. And as those daughters grew up, they made silent promises to themselves that their lives would be different, that they would speak louder, stand taller, and choose their own paths. By the 1960s and 1970s, those promises began to take form. Women marched, wrote, and demanded equality. They stepped into workplaces, universities, and political arenas once closed to them. They became the voice their mothers never had the chance to be. The world began to shift, and with it, the meaning of womanhood changed forever. But that shift did not erase what came before. It built upon it. The silent sacrifices of the 1950s housewife became the foundation for an entire movement. Her patience, her pain, and her persistence were not wasted. They were transformed. The life she never chose became the reason others could choose freely. Today we look back at her story not with pity, but with respect, because behind every clean floor and perfect dinner was a woman holding together the pieces of a world that demanded too much of her. And even though her voice was quiet, it never disappeared. It echoes through time, in the independence of modern women, in the courage to speak, in the belief that happiness should never come at the cost of identity. So the next time you see an old photograph of a 1950s housewife, standing proud beside her husband, holding a casserole, smiling for the camera, remember, that smile carried more than we'll ever know. It carried resilience, it carried hope, and it carried the beginning of a revolution disguised as routine. Because she may not have lived the life she chose, but she gave us the freedom to choose ours. If this story made you reflect on the hidden strength behind those quiet lives, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories of women who changed history without even knowing it. And now I'll leave you with a question, one to carry with you long after this video ends. If you had been her, living in that time, with those expectations, would you have accepted the life you were told to want, or found the courage to rewrite it?